Welcome to Silberman Law Firm's Weekly Docket, episode 14, where we talk legal news and practical law. Today is April 18th, 2024. I'm Phil Silberman, your host and owner of the firm, and I'm joined by my co-host, Austin Black. How are you doing today, Austin?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. What's on our docket today, Austin?
So today we are first talking about Jellyroll getting sued for trademark infringement. And then we're going to hear a little bit about an appeals court currently set a hearing to hear arguments on Florida's ban on Chinese nationals buying homes in Florida. There's been some misinformation about the legality of banning Chinese foreign nationals without U.S. citizenship of buying home. And then we'll be going through our legal questions, specifically focusing on whether or not in Texas you need an estate planning service that involves the creation of various trust structures and things like that. And then in the same vein, in our ranting and raving section, we're going to be talking about a revocable trust, why you, spoiler alert, generally do not need them in Texas, and what to do if an attorney quotes you a revocable trust when you really don't need one. We'll tell you how to approach that situation.
I'm excited for our show today. It sounds like we're talking about Jellyroll, the Chinese in Florida, and estate planning.
That sounds like an accurate summation of what we're going over.
Let's kick it off with our legal news section. We're talking about Jellyroll, who is a country artist, was sued by a popular Philadelphia area wedding band for trademark infringement. Now, Austin, who is Jellyroll?
To be completely honest, I had absolutely no idea who this person is. I've never heard of them. I'm quite proud of the fact that I've never heard of them. With a name like Jellyroll and being a country artist, I don't think that their music can have a huge amount of meaning, but prove me wrong.
So Jellyroll is a fat country singer with face tattoos. He was nominated for 2 Grammys, did not win any. His most famous songs are Son of a Sinner, which is, it's a catchy title. I think we're all sons of sinners. And Save Me, which hence the salvation would be needed if you're the son of a sinner. So can't fault him for those titles. His real name is Jason Bradley DeFord, and he started going by the alias Jellyroll in 2010 when he started doing gigs. And he later applied for a trademark much later in March of 2024. But while Jellyroll is doing all that, it turns out that there's another musical Jellyroll out there. No space, all one word, Jellyroll, that happens to be a popular wedding band in the Philadelphia area. They've been doing weddings for about, 40 years, since the 1980s. Wow. I pulled them up on their website or YouTube. I would describe their music as somewhere between Motown and rap. So their complaint is when people go on to Google and search Jellyroll, they no longer come up. In fact, they say that you might get 18 to 20 references about the Jellyroll country singer with the face tattoos before you even come to any of their listings. And they're saying that's causing them from getting bookings, it's causing the public to be confused, and they're very concerned about this. So they filed a lawsuit against the country singer Jellyroll. Let's talk a little bit about trademark law first. What is the definition of a trademark, Austin? And we've got this as defined by the United States Patent and Trademark Office.
Word, phrase, symbol, design, or a combination of these things that identifies your goods or services. It's how customers recognize you in the marketplace and can distinguish you from your competitors.
Sure. So Coca-Cola, Pepsi, McDonald's, renowned American trademarks. Now, trademarks can be interchangeably used with service marks, but technically there's a difference between a service mark and a trademark. If you offer services, you have a service mark. If you offer goods, you have a trademark. But nowadays, people just collectively refer to both of them as trademarks. What are the elements of trademark infringement, Austin?
Okay, so trademarks are created by the Lanham Act. It's a federal statute. And to infringe upon someone's trademark, you need to have first a valid and legally protectable mark. The person suing has to own the mark. The person who they're alleging breached or infringed upon their trademark has to cause a likelihood of confusion, which is usually where the biggest fight in any trademark dispute is, whether there is actual confusion over who is who with the trademark.
Yeah, that's an accurate rendition of the Lanham Act, which is a federal statute that describes trademark infringement. The meat and potatoes, as Austin was saying, of trademark infringement is whether the public gets confused with the mark. And you can have trademarks arise under both common law and federal statute. There are some benefits to registration, but a good example of confusingly similar I like to use is the movie Coming to America. It is an excellent movie. I highly recommend it. And there's a scene in the movie where Eddie Murphy's playing the African prince, I believe, and he wants to act like a poor person. He wants to come to America and be a regular American. So he wants to get a job, and he ends up applying for a job at a fast food restaurant. And he doesn't apply to a job at McDonald's, but rather he applies for a job at McDowell's, okay? And McDowell's is obviously a ripoff of McDonald's, but it's funny. It's all set up because the owner of McDonald's is there talking to him, and he says, "Oh, those were those guys from McDonald's complaining again. We're nothing like McDonald's. McDonald's has the golden arches. At McDonald's, we have the golden arcs." He's like, at McDonald's, they have the Big Mac. At McDonald's, we have the Big Mick. It is the heart of a very funny comedy, and you should not miss it. Obviously, the public would be confused by McDonald's versus McDonald's and hamburgers.
One of my favorite cases in the entire world is Mattel Company versus Aqua, the band. The song Barbie Girl, and Mattel, who owns Barbie, sued them, alleging trademark infringement. It's interesting. So, yeah.
All right, so you don't have to federally register the mark to get protection. You can get protections that arise just out of common law by using the mark. And that's both at common law, and it's also in the Lanham Act. And the first factor, if you want federal protection under the Lanham Act, is you have to use the trademark in commerce. And then you have to use the trademark in a particularly geographic area. For example, you might see Bill's Auto Repair Shop. Bill is not going to go down to the USPTO and register the trademark, but Bill starts his auto repair shop in Houston, and he begins to have trademark protection by virtue of using the mark in Houston, Texas. And there could be a completely different Bill's Auto Repair Shop in New York City, and the two of them would not necessarily be infringing on each other's trademark. But you do get some additional protections if you federally register the mark. The first thing is you get nationwide rights. So if you go out and register the mark with the USPTO, you can get national protection. It also allows the USPTO to police the mark. So if you have yours registered and other people begin to attempt to register the mark, the USPTO will reject that registration. So they're policing your mark. They're helping you protect your brand. You get the right to sue in federal court, which can be advantageous. So there are certain benefits to federally registering your mark. What about state registration? Is that possible, Austin? Can you register your trademark?
It is. You can register with the Secretary of State, and you do only get state protection. So if you attempted to enforce that trademark outside of the state, that's not going to work. You can't use the federal trademark logo, which is the little R with the circle around it. But it is cheaper to file, less paperwork, and generally costs less if you're hiring an attorney to do that as well.
Yeah. And by the way, we don't really ever recommend that you register the trademark with this. For example, the state of Texas, the Secretary of State will accept a trademark registration. At our law firm, I'm not exactly sure why you would ever register with the state when you could just go straight to the federal. The state charges $50 to register the trademark. I think the federal registration is $250. So the price really is fairly insignificant. So who wins here? We've got Jellyroll with the space versus Jellyroll, the wedding band. Jellyroll said he started using the mark in 2010 under the common law. Is it really confusing, Austin? Would you ever be confused between, they both sing music, but as far as I can tell, that's about it. Would you ever be confused with a wedding band singing Motown/rap/soul music with a country music singer with face tattoos. I don't see it. So can the two of them
I
coexist?
think it's very easy for the two of them to coexist. And I really wonder what the basis of this suit is. I really wonder what was happening that pushed them to actually move forward with this. Because this is not an insignificant lawsuit that I'm sure would have a large amount of legal fees.
It's probably an expensive lawsuit. And I do think there's somewhat of a popular wedding band as far as wedding bands go. They did federally register their mark in 2010. Jellyroll does allege that he started to use the mark without registration about that same time. So there's going to be some analysis of who used it first in time. I think they're going to have a problem convincing the courts that the public is truly confused. Let's go ahead and move right along to something that has nothing to do with wedding bands or country music stars. Let's talk about Florida's ban on Chinese home buying. And there's going to be an appeals court hearing on this. So we're talking about Florida Bill 264, which bans citizens of China and 6 other countries from buying real estate in Florida. There are other states that have these laws. This is not a new thing going on. Our home state of Texas, we have a law that bans the Chinese, Iranians, Russians, North Koreans from buying agricultural land. That's the thing, mines, quarries, oil and gas minerals. We don't want those people from those evil countries owning our precious resources and our minerals. Montana, similar to Texas, but also includes homes near military assets. Alabama only targets Chinese. Alabama, that's all they care about, the Chinese. Everybody else is okay. They don't bother to define real property. So in Alabama, if you're Chinese, screw it. We don't want you. We're not even going to let you lease a double-wide trailer in Alabama. That's how Alabama handles this issue. And other states are considering these types of laws, okay? Georgia, Mississippi as well, Tennessee. But it's not just the conservative states. There are some liberal states as well. California and the state of Washington is also considering some of these types.
Imagine how sad that would be, though. Imagine if you're just a Chinese national, you've grown up, you're just like an Anglophile, you really love like American culture. Your dream is to own a trailer in Alabama, and because of this law, you cannot achieve your dream. I think that's a violation of the American dream for the entire world.
Sounds like a Chinese spy to me. These state laws are not completely unprecedented, okay? The United States government has exerted some control and tightened this up a little bit when it comes to regulation. They've been concerned about our military bases, rightfully so. I don't know if you saw, there was an article, Grand Forks Air Force Base in North Dakota. It was close to doing a deal. A Chinese company was going to buy some land near that Air Force Base. It got canceled. This was the Fu Fang group with ties to the Communist Party. And Fu Fang, that just sounds like an evil company. So I can see why we wanted to.
I don't think it's pronounced exactly like that, but yes, the way you're saying it does.
Fu Fang. So we now have a federal committee on foreign investment, and that committee reviews any land purchases by foreign entities or foreign persons if it's within 100 miles from a U.S. military base. And that was a Biden proposal that was adopted. So the U.S. government is very concerned about this. The states are concerned about this. I want our listeners to know this just isn't conservative Florida or conservative Texas. So what are the details of Senate Bill 264? Prohibits non-citizens who domicile in China from purchasing any property in the state. There's some exceptions for asylum seekers. So if you were fleeing China and you were wanting to seek asylum, fleeing the Communist Party, there may be some exceptions for you. It's less restrictive for some of these other evil countries. They call them countries of concern, like Cuba, Venezuela, Iran, North Korea, Russia, and Syria. I don't get the whole Cuba thing. I don't know how they're going to enforce that in Miami. Because
the same way they try to keep out the Cuban cigars, which is definitely working, right?
Not working at all. So here are the arguments against legality. These are the arguments why this thing should not be legal. First of all, they're arguing it's chilling the effect for Chinese immigrants and Asians that want to buy property or want to assimilate. And we've got a quote here from the Asian American Democratic Club, Ling Lu. Under their bills, everybody will look at Chinese people like a spy. That's Ling Lu, founder of the Asian American Democratic Club. And he's protesting the Texas Senate bill that I think we just passed. So there's that concern. And then to your point on immigration, are you familiar with an H-1B specialty occupation?
It's one of the primary visas that people use to enter and work with the U.S., yes.
Yeah, okay. So those are good people we want here. Those are engineers, scientists, doctors, and they've filed a lawsuit saying it violates the Fair Housing Act. And the Fair Housing Act was enacted in 1968. It's meant to prohibit race discrimination in housing. There are some people also saying that this violates the 14th Amendment, Equal Protection and Due Process Clause. And the idea is that this law, and there's no question, this law does not discriminate against U.S. citizens. We all know that you can't do that anymore. There were a series of laws back in the early-ish 20th century, mostly to do with the Japanese, where we actually discriminated against U.S. citizens. And I believe in 1952, the Supreme Court abolished the last law that discriminated against U.S. citizens based on the fact that their parents may have been Japanese from owning property. So there's no more of that. It's unquestionable you have to let U.S. citizens buy land. You can't discriminate against U.S. citizens. No one's saying we're discriminating against them. But the Supreme Court has long upheld restrictions on purchase of land by foreign individuals, non-U.S. citizens. There is some precedence here. There are many state statutes out there that regulate involvement with foreign individuals that we think are problems or concerning. So, for example, pension funds or asset procurement, we won't let those offices do business with Iran or countries that refuse to do business with Israel, for example. So there's precedence for these kinds of laws. How do we think this comes out, Austin?
I don't know. I think that there should be more protections for people. For instance, like preventing H-1B visa holders from purchasing property, I think is ridiculous. Those are the sort of people you want here. I think that there should be some sort of screening process to determine if there is any cause for concern for various people purchasing who are foreign nationals, maybe from these countries. But just carte blanche saying you can't buy it if you're a citizen of this country, I think is a bit ridiculous.
This is a very fast evolving area of law. And a lot of this is stemming from the geopolitical tensions between China and the U.S. I think this ends up more politically than it does legally. The 11th Circuit is going to hear this, and they're going to make a decision on Florida's anti-Chinese purchase law. We'll see if that ends up getting all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court or what happens with that. Hopefully, whatever comes out, we don't make the same mistakes that we made during World War II with the Japanese, where we really did discriminate pretty harshly against Japanese citizens. All right, let's answer some legal questions. Who really needs estate planning and trust? We get this call all the time, and they call up and they say, I need estate planning and I've got to have a trust. What's your answer to that?
I'm pretty sure you don't. That is my answer to that. Then I'll ask them some questions.
That tends to burst their bubble because it's like all these rich people need estate planning and trust. The thing with America, you may not know this, Austin, and they did a survey. Very few people, if any people, really ever identified with being poor. They identified with the fact that they're just not rich yet.
Yes.
America still has that mentality. And the people calling us, most of the time, 99% of situations, people do not need a living trust or any other kind of complex estate planning. There are some rare circumstances where we might want to suggest that they get some complex estate planning or trust. So if someone calls up and they say, okay, I've got, a bunch of money, and we're talking about over 25 million if you're married in 2024. So a lot of money. They probably need a fancy estate planning attorney, and you're going to get into all of these complex things that our firm actually does not do. We will refer those types of people to an estate planning attorney. You're going to get into things like Q-tips, IDTs, and it's very complex stuff. And the liability, if you're out there and listening to the show and you're one of those people that has a net worth of that amount, you want a qualified attorney, but more importantly is you want an attorney with a really big malpractice policy. And you want a firm that's very well heeled, because that is the easiest and the quickest way to commit malpractice is to start dabbling in those complex areas of estate planning.
If you get an attorney who thinks a Q-tip in this context is inserted in your ear, you definitely want to steer clear. Yeah.
Stay away from that guy. Okay. Now there is some concern that these larger estate tax thresholds. So if your estate is worth under 25 million and you're married, nothing to worry about until the end of 2025. If Congress does not take action, if they take zero actions, then the old thresholds are going to take place, which ends up being about $7.5 million for individuals and $14.5 million for married people. Newsflash, that's still a lot of money for 99%.
Really?
I don't know what the percentage is of married people that have a net worth over 14 million, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's less than 1% of the country, even if those tax thresholds do reset. So you may need a trust if you've got a child or someone you want to provide for that has a special need. You can need a special needs trust. If you're prone to disability, you may want a trust for that kind of situation. If you have assets in other countries or other states, that may be appropriate for a trust.
If another quick one, if you have a child that you can't trust to have a large amount of money, a spendthrift trust, it's what that's for.
Yeah, so you certainly some reasons you may want to do some more in-depth estate planning, but the reality is you probably just need a will and some basic powers of attorney. Texas has a very simple probate process. We average what probate takes, about 60 days. How much are we currently charging for a testing probate?
Flat fee, usually of $3,000. That includes the filing fee. Yeah,
and we're not trying to sell you our services. I mean, you can use whatever firm you want to use, but the probates are fairly uncomplicated, affordable processes in Texas. If you get an attorney quoting you much over $5,000 for a probate, that's a red flag for a simple probate with a will. So you need a basic will. You need a medical power of attorney. Just should you become incapacitated, designate someone to make decisions about your health. You need a statutory durable power of attorney that takes care of your financial assets should you become incapacitated. And you can get a will and basic POAs done starting at around $1,000. So it's a very affordable process. You can go to law firms out there and you can pay more. If you're the kind of person you want the white glove treatment. In the old days, this is how you got it done. You would go into a lawyer's office, you'd have an initial estate planning consult, you drink coffee, water, you get some free chocolate. The attorney would listen to you, and then you would go home and he would draft everything up, and then you would do a review, and then he'd bring you back for this very official looking will signing. You would get some expensive paper to print your will on, and there would be this blue back. I don't know if you've ever seen any. Have you ever seen any wills, Austin? Okay. You have this blue backing on the paper, and the witnesses come in, and you're signing on mahogany, and you're sitting in leather chairs. If you want that kind of experience, you're going to pay a lot of money for that experience, but you don't need it. But I will say this, don't use the internet forms. It's like in life, don't go with the most expensive bidder, but don't go with the cheapest bidder also. And those internet companies, the forms out there, they're often national forms. They don't necessarily fit in Texas. The will likely be valid. So I'm not totally throwing them under the bus. The will likely to be valid. But one of the biggest problems we see is that people getting the internet forms, they just don't know how to sign this stuff. They don't know what a testator is, where the testator signs. They don't know what witnesses they're supposed to use, and they'll sometimes name beneficiaries, and I'll try to use those beneficiaries as a witness, and that's a big no-no. And just basic things like completing the statutory acknowledgement, the short form acknowledgement on the notary block. And if you don't know what a short form acknowledgement block is, that's probably a red flag that you don't need to use an internet form because you're going to mess up how to sign that thing, and that can be a big problem. Also, if you have minor children, don't use internet forms because most of the time those wills will not accommodate the designation of a financial trustee. And you need just a little baby testamentary trust where you name a trustee with those minor kids. And then you also want to designate a guardian, and those internet forms typically don't. All right, now we can get into our rants and raves section. And we're talking about the revocable trust or living trust. So what is a revocable trust, Austin?
It's a trust that you make where you can revoke it later or change it.
Austin always just knocks these out of the park. All right. It allows the grantor, the person who made the trust, to make changes or terminate the trust.
As opposed to an irrevocable trust where you cannot.
Yeah. So supposed advantages of a living, and these are also known as living trusts. So supposed advantages of living trust, it avoids the probate court, which again is not that big a deal because in Texas you can get a probate done in about 60 days, but that's how they sell them to you. Avoid complex probate. They tell you that it helps with privacy. You don't want wills or public records. You don't want all of your business out there in the public records, except nowadays in Texas, you can affidavit in lieu of inventory so no one can really see everything that you have. There's not a lot of publicity of your personal affairs in the public records. And they tell you, it gives you the ability to plan for incapacity. Yeah. Yes, except you can really do that with a medical power of attorney and a durable power of attorney. So I'm not sure that it does anything for you there. So here's the rant about revocable trust, though. You probably don't need them, and it's just been a huge moneymaker for these services and a lot of attorneys out there. When I was in college, I worked for this one law firm up in Austin, and the whole shtick, I'm going to try to not incriminate myself. I want to let everyone know, when I was in college, I was just a college kid, and I wanted a job, and I thought I might want to be a lawyer. And their whole shtick was the owner would go around to these retirement homes and sell the revocable trust and the pour-over will and all these other documents to all these old people who just wanted somebody to talk to. At that time, he was selling it for $5,000, and that was a long time ago. So now, if he's still doing it, he's probably going around getting 10 grand. And these old people did not need any of it. So, and I want to highlight just how crooked this is. The FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, and several attorney generals, and I think ARP as well, and there's now a consumer alert about this, put out some statements about just how crooked this is.
Oh, do you really want your son and daughter to have to pay this huge amount of money and all of this to deal with your assets after you? Do you want to be a burden to them? It's always that kind of stuff. And it's completely false. They just don't need it. All they need is a will.
They're preying on elderly people. If you don't believe me, just Google living trust scams. You will see the FTC statements. You'll see several attorney general statements about selling these overpriced estate plan docs that people don't need.
In Breaking Bad, he started off doing elder law, and even he didn't do that. He told them they just needed a will in that show. So these people are worse than one of the most crooked lawyers on television history. It's really sad. So
I'm going to go back and I'm going to go watch that episode now. I can't believe that the living trust was even beneath
Saul Goodman. Yes.
These things are terrible for many reasons. You have to remember, if you're going to have one, you have to remember to put every single asset in probate, which just never happens. You have this rev trust, this living trust, and mom and dad, they have to put their house in it. They really should put their cars in it. Their bank account should be styled in the name of the trust, or they should at least have beneficiary designations on the bank accounts that name the trust. And mom and dad, without fail, I don't think we've ever had one where they have remembered to put every single asset for the rest of their lives in this trust. So when they come to us, the kids are like, oh, mom and dad had a trust. And we have to bad news to them. Well, they forgot to really fund the trust. So now we're going to have to probate this thing called the pour-over will anyway. So we're probating the will so everything can get into the trust so we can administer the trust. So that it never works for that reason. And many of them don't even realize you actually have to change title to everything. They just leave the real estate in their personal names thinking the trust automatically inherits or encompasses all these assets.
And not that they should even know that. That's the responsibility of the lawyer who set up this.
And it's not just lawyers. There are a lot of these services out there that are preying upon these people. And living trusts are not cheaper. You've got probably $5,000 to $10,000 in legal fees from these services or lawyers to set them up. You can average $500 a deed to transfer the real estate into the trust. Legal fees, again, to do a probate, probably around $3,000, takes 60 days. So you're a lot less. And you're not having to administer the trust for the rest of your life and pay legal fees when you want to make changes. So these things are just awful deals. And I'm glad the government, I'm glad the Attorney General, I'm glad the FTC finally put out some documentation on how crooked these things are. But Austin, there is the Susie Orman factor. Did you know who Susie Orman was
No, I did
before the
not.
show? Okay, well, Susie Orman is a well-known TV personality. And you probably don't know who Susie Orman is because I would guess that her target audience is like a middle-aged woman, or maybe I think I am officially middle-aged now. So her target audience is probably someone a little bit older than me who watches local news and things like that. And she was a well-known TV personality for many years. I think she still is. But if someone comes to us and they've been brainwashed by Susie Orman into believing they absolutely need a living trust, we will do everything in our power to disabuse them of that notion. But sometimes we cannot. And I was curious, so I Googled Susie Orman. I found this from her website. Austin, do you have that quote?
I do.
From Susie
As I
Orman's
often
website?
talk about on my Women in Money podcast, having a revocable trust in place is one of the most important things you can do to protect yourself and your family. So many of you still don't have one, and I have to be honest, it makes me a little bit nuts.
That's from July 7th, 2023. Susie, if you're out there listening to this podcast, you drive me nuts. And I cannot believe you are still spewing this absolute filth and these lies. So her lawyers are listening. She probably has some very fancy lawyers, and they're now taking notes on how they can sue me for slander and defamation and business disparagement. Let me lay down the gauntlet. If you're listening to this, go ahead and come for me. You know where to find me. I'm down here in Texas. Phil,
Please, that would be so much fun.
We're going to get one here. It's only a matter of time before we get the letter from Susie Orman's lawyers. But nonetheless, look, if you're convinced that Susie Orman is right and she wants you to do this trust, we will draw those documents up. If you absolutely have to have a living trust, we will review her documents that she has sold you. We will do the best we can to get you squared away. We don't want to turn away the business, but, and hear me on this, but, you will get a nasty disclaimer email from us saying that we have told you you didn't need any of this and you just needed a simple will and some powers of attorneys. But despite our begging and our pleading with you, you've chosen not to follow our advice, and we'll go ahead and do what you want us to do. At that point, we've done everything we can ethically that I feel pretty good about that decision. But Susie Orman, shame on you if you've given these people the Susie Orman Kool-Aid and drank it. You don't need this, people. All right, now I'm fired. And that means when I get fired up, that's time for the show to come to a close because I'm scared of what I might say next. I've been your host, Phil Silberman. Austin Black has been my co-host. Like us, follow us, review us wherever you listen to your podcast. If you have a legal question, go ahead and email us, info@silblawfirm.com, info@silb, lawfirm.com. Say you want that question answered publicly in the podcast. Thanks, everybody, for listening.
Thanks,
Have a
everyone.
great day.
Bye.